Welcome back, my darlings. My name is Silvadorkable. I am your friendly monster waifu, and we are going to continue with the assembly of the May Endothermic Blaster 3D printed model. So, for those of you who have not seen the previous 3 videos, this is a 3D printed PLA piece that is assembled using various different types of glue, and it's from the character May from the video game Overwatch. She is an ice character, so she essentially ends up having what is called an endothermic blaster, and this is the gun part of it. Right now, I am currently going through and filing down the edges. These are the side pieces, and those red pieces have to line up inside of it. Because of the multiple layers of paint that I applied on it, sometimes you do have to kind of file down some of the areas just to make sure they fit a little bit better, since no one's going to see that side of it anyway. So for the most part, these actually snap into place on the gun sides. However, I'm going to be gluing them just to make sure that they stay put. As you can see, some of the different areas of the gun tend to be a little bit fragile if you don't secure them really well. I would definitely suggest using I believe it's E9000 or E3000, the very famous craft glue that you can pretty much pick up at any craft store. A lot of what I did use a very thin, almost watery consistency super glue. While it doesn't bubble up and add a lot of buffer or space between the pieces, I did feel that it kind of didn't really adhere as much as I wanted it to, because it has a very fluid consistency. A lot of it didn't really take as quickly as I wanted it to, and I felt like it just kind of dribbled away, and then when it did actually, apply, it didn't have as good of a hold as I wanted it to. It works really well on pre-painted or unpainted things. However, I found that it doesn't really work very well on painted surfaces, most likely because they're less porous. Right here, I'm just trying to prop up the pieces so that I can essentially let them dry without having to sit there and hold them for 20 minutes. I usually try to give them a good 20 to 40 minutes to dry, even though they probably dry in a lot less time. I just like having that peace of mind knowing that they're not going to be going anywhere, and as long as I don't mishandle them, they should at least last a decent amount of time there. So with those two pieces done, eventually. So you can't quite see it, but there is a small back piece that is colored gold that is supposed to snap on. Now, even though I 3D printed this file from a Thingiverse website, I did find that the things didn't quite line up 100% as they should on her Canon gun. Granted, it's not a huge problem when it really comes down to it. A lot of people aren't going to sit there and pick apart your cosplay prop saying that this is in disproportion to that and this doesn't meet up with this. And it's probably better than any of the things you could get that's made out of foam like I have. However, I'm a very big nitpicker when it comes to things lining up or looking like they belong, so for me it very much bothered me. Ultimately, no one's going to notice. You can barely see the little area right underneath that white portion. But for the most part, I'm just making sure things line up as they should. And eventually, when I can get the camera to fix right, I decided that I wanted to do some additional painting on it. So I happen to like hand painting things a lot, but this, I noticed that there were some gaps in between the sides of the orb and where they met the white casing, and it was very dark, and it just hadn't been filled in because of my hand painting wasn't able to reach that. So right here, I'm just touching that up. Alright, so I ended up fast forwarding this part just because I really doubt you want to watch me paint for 20 minutes. So pretty much just went around the outside, and here as soon as we are done, we are going to be applying that last little piece that essentially is supposed to hold the orb in place. Now, I ended up tacking this on both sides, very simple, however it does make it a little challenging if I ever wanted to replace the orb. I'd probably end up having to completely re-3D print some of these pieces and reassemble them anyway, which honestly wouldn't be a bad thing. Although I'm very proud of what I did, I don't think that the paint job I put on it was probably the best. I have a very bad habit of applying layers of paint very thick instead of applying many thin layers over a course of time that you're supposed to do, which I very much would suggest because things tend to get gummy, they tend to get a little bulky, and they lose some of their definition when you apply them in thick layers of paint instead of a thin layer, let it dry, a thin layer, let it dry. But so far it is actually looking pretty good. With that being said, we are applying the side pieces. Now you will know there's a little bit of wiggle room, however a good amount of glue on the underside of those keeps them in place, which is always a nice thing. As long as you can't see the glue, I honestly don't think there's so much thing as too much glue. There's also, in this file that I used, there were two separate little front pieces, and they were made for two different sized orbs. Now essentially, you're supposed to be able to get a marble or something along those lines and actually put that in there. However, I didn't feel like going out to the store and buying one single marble or something that could make one marble, so I ended up printing a orb. So this is the front piece, which I ended up breaking off later on because that glue really does not do the job, especially when it comes to small contact parts or parts that have been painted. So I ended up having to go back and use that tube of glue in the background, the e-glue, to reapply them after it ended up breaking off later on. However, for the meantime, this did look pretty nice. It's very clear and water consistent, so it just kind of goes on, but it has a tendency to leak everywhere. I wouldn't suggest it for a project unless you really are good at handling liquids. So just letting that sit for a minute. It was a little challenging. I couldn't put it down because of the fact that unfortunately the pieces were resting right in the center and inside at an angle, so I wasn't able to really set it down and let it just adhere. The one good thing that one particular liquid glue does is it does adhere pretty fast. So ultimately, I think it's good for tacking something in place when you need it. However, I don't suggest it for a long-term solution. So now that we have some of these things actually set aside, I'm going to let that dry now that it's tacked, and we are going to go ahead and try to just reinforce some of this, make sure that it kind of stays where it needs to be and doesn't wiggle around. Unfortunately, the e-glue, though it is nice and tacky and it does have some consistency, sometimes it's a little bit too rubberized, so I like using that thinner glue to kind of knock it in place. As you see, it didn't exactly adhere the way I wanted it to. So it's kind of a matter of finding the right glue when it comes down to it. Sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're not. Knowing my luck, by the end of this video, I'll actually have found a better type of glue to use. However, in the meantime, not so much. So applying these was very easy. I just wanted to get the gun as level as possible. The pieces are designed to slide right in, so as soon as I managed to put a layer of glue just to make sure that they adhered well enough, I was able to pop them on and they stay in place. The one good thing is that they actually don't have anything to do with the barrel of the gun, which you will see is the large blue piece, which I ended up going back and adding a layer of metallic at a gradient perspective just to kind of give it a little bit more depth because I felt like it needed it. It was very flat and cartoony looking and I just didn't appreciate it. Going back, I probably would add a lot more metallics to this gun if I was to repaint it. However, I was going off of the official art, the official art, not the fan art, and I did find that even though they do have pretty flat colors in the design, it isn't the final design, whereas her gun does look more metallic because it's supposed to be made out of metal. So it would make more sense to use metallic paints now that I look at it, but, you know, retrospect is 2020. Alright, so right here I'm just going to be doing a little bit of touch up here and there. Nothing super big, just finding the spots where either the glue leaked onto it or possibly the paint transferred or even chipped off in some cases. And it's just a good time to take some acrylic, end up cleaning up anything that you see that you think might need it. The good thing about our acrylic is that you can actually wipe it off fairly easy. So even if you do end up getting it somewhere, a little bit of water and effort can usually clean the rest of it off. This gun is a little unwieldy just because, unlike most guns, which as far as traditional guns go, as far as handguns, they are more squared and don't have as many protruding parts. Now this one is a very over-the-top cartoony kind of style of gun, so it does have parts. It has rounded parts, it has parts sticking out to the side like that little valve that's red. It's very challenging to find a way of laying it without possibly compromising something else as far as structural integrity goes, which is why you'll notice that I use a lot of acrylic bottles to prop it up so that the items that are in the middle that normally would end up hitting the table actually stay levitated in air. So at this point I was trying to decide which one of the front pieces I actually liked more. I ended up going, I believe, with the larger one just because I felt it had a little bit nicer of an appeal with having a metallic marble right there. However, you could easily go with the smaller one if you were to use a marble. I think the reason that they included two is just because, you know, different dimensions and everything. So this part was super easy, just line it up, glue right on top. The thing is that some of these pieces you'll notice do have divots inside of them. Now essentially they were made so that someone could get tiny little screws and actually drill holes and put screws into them. Unfortunately, most of the places I went, I just could not find the best screws that I wanted, or ones that I really felt worked with that size. So right there we are actually gluing the barrel in place. I'm just going to make sure that that, as well as the sides, all stay with a nice little rubber band, kind of keep it safe and steady. We're just going to let that rest. I assumed that if I wanted to go back, I probably could actually find some screws and put them through, but I found it just really wasn't worth the additional effort of trying to go from store to store, especially during the pandemic. So I'm sure if you went to like a craft store and you went to a jewelry section, you could find some, but finding a drill bit as well as the actual screws themselves just seemed like a huge inconvenience at the time. If I were to ever remake this, there are things I would do differently, such as actually using the screws as well as using metallic paint and probably using a much better glue, as well as just the painting technique in general. But overall, I'm still very happy with how this actually turned out. It was a lot of effort and it was a lot of time. The 3D printer, which I do owe you guys a review of, does not print fast whatsoever. So this is the final product. I was super happy with it. I thought that it turned out really well. You can see kind of some of my little projects and setup in the background. I got a lot of various knickknacks and crap that have accumulated, including my Pokeball. Here's a little bit better of a perspective. You can actually see the metallic gradient on the barrel now, as well as the marble that I put in the front. Now, after this was all put together, I ended up putting a clear lacquer on it just to kind of help with everything, and I was really happy with it. So I hope all of you liked this, and I will see you on the next episode, darlings. Bye!